every business decision we have, whether it's an M&A, a new line of business, whatever it is, if we aren't thinking about cybersecurity and cyber risk and how that impacts this, then that's going to have a strategic impact on our business. You're going to have to take some of your personal time and invest in understanding, okay, what are the dynamics of this? What are some of the key concepts, those sorts of things, so that I can provide the right level of oversight and leadership.
Brett, first and foremost, thank you very much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be here and to share some thoughts with us. And maybe the best place to start is with your son. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, as you know, I pinned the same wings on him 2 weeks ago that my grandfather pinned on me 34 years ago.
Wow.
When I graduated from pilot training. And my wife was in the Air Force for 20 years, I was in for 33 years, and now my son's off to fly the F-16, and so continuing that Air Force legacy in the family is pretty special to us.
Well, I forget if it was on LinkedIn or where it was, but I saw the picture, and it's just like, those moments are just so special. And maybe the best place to, kind of jump into this would be interested in hearing about your grandfather and your legacy and just kind of how you got into, the Air Force and just sort of an overview of your career, because obviously it's pretty incredible. Maybe just walk us through that if you can.
Absolutely. And my grandfather never flew in the Air Force. He bought an airplane right at the end of World War II. Back then, like you could buy Jeeps wrapped in cosmoline, he bought a Piper Cub. And so he flew that airplane for quite a while. And then, I don't know, someplace as I was growing up, I decided at first I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I said, I don't really want to be a lawyer. I think I want to be a pilot. And so I still haven't been able to identify the guidance counselor that said, well, you ought to apply for an Air Force scholarship and you ought to apply to go to Duke. And I did both of those, and I ended up at Duke with an Air Force scholarship and met my wife at Duke. We both commissioned right after graduation. My wife, Mary Ann, served 20 years. She retired as a lieutenant colonel, and then I spent 33 years in the Air Force.
I'll be darned.
So most of that time, 28 years, I was an F-15 pilot. I worked my way up through the various levels of command, and in my final command I had the privilege of commanding our largest combat wing in Okinawa, Japan, the 18th Wing at an airbase called Kadena, which was an interesting job. About 9,000 people in the wing doing all the things you have to do to run a wing. At the same time, we had essentially a town of 25,000 on the base, so I was the mayor, the chief of police. We were surrounded by 3 towns that really didn't want us in Okinawa, so a lot of political dimensions to that. So, but a really terrific job. We loved being in Japan, and getting to know the Japanese was great.
Wow.
Then one day I get a call that says it's time for you to leave Kadena, and you're going to go join the IT, comm, and communications, command and control, and cyber world. And so I spent the last 5 years of my career working in primarily cybersecurity and helping to form what is essentially the operating construct and the force structure and the budget that United States Cyber Command is now pursuing to defend our nation in cyberspace.
Wow, and you were eminently qualified for that position.
Oh, absolutely. I had a 1981 computer science degree from Duke that you could do the whole thing on your wristwatch now, but it was a great leadership experience, going from being a wing commander, being an operational commander, doing all of those sorts of things. Had a lot of opportunity to do a variety of combat missions in Southwest Asia, and now I'm with a group of folks who are looking at me going, why are you our new leader? You've got wings on. Can't one of our own people good enough?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of started my leadership experience, and with moving from something that I was very comfortable and very familiar with into something that was a completely new, if you will, set of operations and set of tasks and those sorts of things. But what I very quickly figured out, and something that I've carried with me, is that leadership is technology agnostic. And the things that made you a good leader that got me to that point in my career, I didn't need to change because I was now working in a completely different line of business, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so over the last 7 or 8 years, as I've had the chance to do some speaking, and now almost 3 years in the private sector, I see all of that as exactly the same.
The specifics associated with your advice on cybersecurity sort of, it started with CEOs taking it seriously. Mm-hmm. From your experience, how could that possibly be, the case in this day and age, that you wouldn't be aware of or take it as seriously as you needed to?
Right. What I've seen is they take it seriously, but they underestimate how far their organization is away from really having a culture that says, and I agree with you, there's a lot of disruptors. Cybersecurity happens to be the big one right now. The technology is the disruptor. I think cybersecurity is a component of technology disruption in the sense that technology is code for plug it into the internet and connect it to everything, and with that comes great benefit, but also it comes with great risks. And business is all about managing risk, right? It's where do I allocate resources in order to mitigate risk, manage risk, do those sorts of things. And so what happens, I think, is people who are at the very senior level, right? They know everything about how the business operates, and they know everything about finance, right? And they know, hey, if I'm the CEO or I'm a director on the board, I've got a question about operations, I know exactly what to ask Sam, and I know if the answer is, shall we say, less than rigorous in the data that backs it up. Same thing, if I got a question about the income statement, I know exactly what to ask the CFO, and I know if the answer makes sense. But if I got a question about IT risk or cybersecurity or cyber risk, I look at the CIO and I go, hey Fred, are we good? Right? And that is completely different. And then the flip side of that is, instead of me making meaningful statements, taking meaningful actions, executing meaningful leadership behaviors, I don't know what those are because I don't know enough about, let's call it cyber risk in this case, for me to do that. So I essentially delegate that to Sam. But when you need to change the culture of an organization to say that every business decision we have, in this case cybersecurity is our example, every business decision we have, whether it's an M&A, a new line of business, whatever it is, if we aren't thinking about cybersecurity and cyber risk and how that impacts this, then that's going to have a strategic impact on our business. I can't change that culture by delegating that culture change to the CIO or the CISO. That's got to be me. And so when I go into boardrooms and do these 3-hour sessions, the biggest message I try to leave with them is that, you came in and got to this position because let's just operations and finance. You know a lot about, that's how you run businesses, right? You know nothing about this. But if you're going to be able to ask the right questions, understand the answers, know when things aren't going right, then you're going to have to dig down and learn a little bit about this. And I'll give you a quick example of this. Is when I showed up again at that wing at Kadena, I had a civil engineering group. There's only 5 in the Air Force. Usually you have a squadron, I had a group with squadrons, so there's about 1,800 people supervise roads, buildings, all that sort of stuff. And so we'd had a runway that had been closed for 6 months while they were resurfacing the runway. And they went out to do some tests, not important what the test is, but they're driving a pickup truck on the runway, and the guy looks down and he goes, you think we ought to be leaving tire marks in this new runway? No, probably not, right? And so it turned out that there had been a number of errors made in the engineering of that. We'd spent several $1 million on it, had it closed for 6 months, huge operational impact. And so I had to go in, and eventually I'm standing over the shoulder of the Japanese contractor, and he's showing me the chart of how much gravel versus how much sand, and here's when the mistakes were made, all that stuff. So it was up to me to deep dive enough into that so that I would know in the future, okay, what are the red flags? What are the questions I should be asking? I don't have to be able to do his job, but I've got to be able to learn enough to know what the red flags are and that sort of thing. Okay. And I think as a senior leader, the first thing I've got to do is I've got to understand the people, those other senior people below me. Do I trust them? Do I think that, But if I have a doubt or if I have a question, when I went to that wing, I knew a lot about operations, a lot about maintenance. I didn't know a lot about civil engineering. I had a 500-person hospital. I didn't know a lot about running a hospital. So those are the areas I went and spent time with, and not just getting the, hey sir, come on over, let's get you on the tour. I spent time sitting next to people asking, what do you do? How does this work? What are the things that cause you problems? All that sort of thing. Same thing when I get into the cyber job. I had to build first empathy with that new team, that they knew that I knew how hard their job was, how little appreciated they were, nobody saw this as important, all that sort of thing. So step 1 was to build that empathy. I think step 2 was to get enough knowledge on my side. I'm not going to do their job and sit down on the keyboard, but this is a completely new field. If I don't learn a couple of levels down what's going on, I don't know what the red flags are, and I'm stuck doing exactly what I said that board member is when he goes, hey Fred, are we good? And and you can't afford to do that. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about, I think, any other disruption to an organization. You're going to have to take some of your personal time and invest in understanding, okay, what are the dynamics of this? What are some of the key concepts, those sorts of things, so that I can provide the right level of oversight and leadership.
And to me, if it becomes apparent that the CEO, that they're really concerned about cybersecurity, right? And they're doing all this investigation and kind of asking these questions, that word's going to get around. In situational leadership terms, if you have a CEO and they are not, they don't have knowledge, experience, and skill, they're kind of R1, they're admitting their own readiness, for that task and for the implications of it, their first step, nothing standing in their way, obviously, is to get better information so that they can make informed decisions. So as opposed to delegating something you know nothing about, right? You're really in the trenches, figuring that out, and also I think adding credibility, to the people that are in that division, to the CIO, whoever else it happens to be.
That's a huge point, Sam, that add credibility, because one half of my job was building credibility with all these knowledge workers, all these cyber people, that this is my favorite team. Whatever team I'm on is my favorite team, and we're going to go out and do this. But because of where I came from, I could go to the other ship drivers, tank drivers, airplane drivers, and I could get into meetings they couldn't get into. See, that's the problem that the CIOs and the CISOs have today, is they want them to come into the boardroom or come into the C-suite and talk in business relevant terms and those sorts of things. And very few CIOs or CISOs, they haven't spent the last 20 years in those meetings. You call them in when the video teleconference doesn't work. You don't call them in to discuss the next acquisition, right? Yet now they're expected to come in and talk about ROI and in business relevant terms. And many of them really struggle to do that. And so same thing with those folks that were working in the cyber and IT business. They're toiling away. Nobody's helped them connect the dots from what they do to the mission, which is another huge theme of mine, is if you're handing out towels in the gym in Saudi Arabia at our base, you ought to know why what you do every day contributes to airplanes taking off and putting warheads on foreheads, as we used to say. And as a leader, you have to connect people to that. And so, because I could go into rooms and I could talk to these other operators, even if my predecessor had come in and basically said the same type of things, he wouldn't have said it the same way. But now you're going, well, ET's saying it, that must be important, And so I found that to be a huge advantage for me in terms of raising the awareness and moving what I thought was the right agenda forward. But the other effect was, now people started going, hey, we're about to start this important planning meeting, and there's nobody there from the IT and cyber side. We got to hold on and wait till we got to go get one of them. And it wasn't because the video teleconference didn't work. It's because they said this is strategically important to our mission. And so now you got these people who had been toiling away in rooms with no windows. Nobody calls you up and goes, hey, the computer system worked really good today. I appreciate it, right?
I just got on today. I logged on and it was
this
perfect.
Is super. I just want to tell you that, right? Now they've got people calling them, and they're calling them because they need their expertise to connect to the mission. Right? And so it drove the folks on this side to learn a lot more about this. And then once they learn more about it, they go, I need more information. I need this expertise in the room with me. I need this to be a critical part. And the self-fulfillment, that was probably the biggest personal pleasure I got out of that job, was seeing kind of the chest puffed out, and that whole sense of, hey, we're part of the fight here. What I'm saying?
You do a fantastic job of describing both sides of that, right? It's kind of like if you're in a support function and you're not used to speaking business terms, there's a certain amount of it's on you, right, to be able to learn those terms, to be able to make sense in those conversations. So if you allow yourself to sort of be compartmentalized, a certain part of that is on you, okay? And I see, and I saw in your article, there's some real parallels between the IT space, if you will, in the context of the big picture in organizations, and the training folks. Training people talk all the time about they want a seat at the big table. Well, the training people that have a seat at the big table, they've earned that. They speak the business's language. they position training in the context of competitive advantage and costs and what it means and how it contributes and all those kinds of things, but they're few and far between. Unless there's that initiative, that leadership being taken on the part of whoever heads up the training organization, most executives are not saying, let's get the training people in here, unless there's a specific special question.
But there's a push and a pull, right?
Yeah.
Because there are smart people that work for me when I first got to, it's called the J6 is the organization that does this. And there were smart people in there and they could knock on the door all day long, but until I created a situation where they open the door. So you're right. It's almost like your example of OJT is like I could be a CISO and I could go out and get my MBA at the executive program at night, right? And so, but if I haven't had the experience and I am not had the opportunity to be exposed to, okay, how does this work in the real world, and given an opportunity to let you know that, hey, I know how to fit this in, right? So it's definitely it's initiative on this side, right, to get yourself smart and take advantage of it, and sometimes to knock on doors where people aren't used to having you knock on the door. At the same time, as a leader, you've got to be smart enough to recognize, hey, here's somebody that, hey, this is the basic leadership thing. Hey, here's somebody that's trying to make themselves better and contribute to the team and all of that. How do I mentor, support, make them more effective and integrate them with them? So I think both those things go in there.
So the whole idea of key executives in organizations that are communicating that cybersecurity is a priority, right? It's certainly their involvement in learning as much as they can learn. There might also be some accountability things, some consequences for non-compliance. And I would imagine if there are some people in an organization or some key folks that lose their jobs because they're not taking these things seriously, that can send a message very, very quickly and very, very specifically. And the other thing you spoke to that I thought was really interesting was, and it probably is what happened to you, if you take high potentials, if you take people that are coming up in your organization that everybody knows is earmarked for great things, significant leadership positions, and you put them in charge of, or you force them into lateral sort of moves within the organization that focus on cybersecurity, that sends, again, a huge cultural message there.
On what's important.
Yeah.
And the first piece on accountability, we kind of went right to, okay, if you don't comply, you're going to get fired. To me, there's a big chain before that. One piece is the communication piece. Did I communicate why this is important, and did you receive that message, right? Part two is, leaders inspire, they resource, and then they motivate. And the resource part is, did I give you the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to do what it is I expect you to do? And then, did I test to see whether my training had been effective? Because I'm huge on the difference between training and exercising. And this is an area that I think clearly there's an advantage in the military, because exercising is such a part of our culture, and we create the environment where the purpose of the exercise is to identify gaps and shortfalls in our training and to be able to correct those. What I've seen in the private sector, what I'm exposed to most is the cybersecurity piece, is they don't create this environment where everybody understands that we're going to create a stressful exercise. It's got to be stressful so you kind of forget you're talking to the CEO as you're going through this. And it's also got to be where at the end of it, we identify gaps that Sam has in being able to execute, or that the company has. It's not going to reflect on Sam, it's going to reflect on us. We didn't give you the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to do what it is we expect you to do. Now, if the third exercise down the road, Sam's still making the same mistakes, then we've got another issue. But once we've done that, once we've communicated what this is, why it's important, what our expectations are, I do the training, give you knowledge, skills, and ability to be able to do that. I validate that my training was good, right? Then I got to hold you accountable, right? Because everybody in your company is held accountable. And depending on the industry, how much it's regulated, all of that stuff, but that accountability speaks very large. The example I used to give, there have been maintenance personnel, aircraft maintenance personnel, who have been held accountable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and been removed from the service, have done time incarcerated because they didn't follow proper maintenance procedures that could put an airplane or a crew or a pilot at risk, right? And
Yeah.
you can find analogies to that in every business. But how often do you see people strategic risks to the business based on your individual behavior on the network? Or if you get egregious, there's people that sell their passwords, all sorts of things. But you're right, at some point I've got to hold people accountable for those activities. And then that starts to send a message that, hey, this is serious business. And then the other piece, I've had this discussion with folks in the private sector. I go, have you thought about taking that 30-year-old business unit leader that is just kicking butt and making him the deputy CIO for 3 years? Oh, we can't do that, that'd ruin his career. I said, you gotta be kidding me. Every article you see says, we need board members that understand this, we need CEOs that understand this. 10 years from now, when it's time for him to compete to be the COO, don't you think it'd be pretty valuable for him to have that perspective? I mean, have been immersed in that, to really understand how hard it is to do this job, what are all the cultural barriers that you're fighting out there? I mean, he's gonna have or she is gonna have a completely different view of that. So I think as a leader, you can set the environment that says that's important. So that's another part of your accountability. But this is why we take this seriously. We're taking Sam, who had biggest sales numbers in the company over the last 3 years, and now he's gonna go over and he's gonna be the deputy CIO, right? And before I do that, though, I've got to know Sam's willing to, he sees this as important, he's going to take it on, he's going to invest his time to get smarter in it, and that he has the basic leadership skills that it takes to be just as effective over there as he is over here in this sales organization.
And it's something he's passionate about. And
Right. Or can get passionate about. I wasn't super passionate when they first told me, but as I got into it and I realized the importance of it, I was super passionate.
Well, I'll tell you, on behalf of everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Leadership is a passion of mine, and to be able to participate in something like this with somebody that's got your position in the field, in the industry, in the art is really a special opportunity.